And now moving on to the last and the most important element of style in Walter Pater's view, he talks about mind and soul. He says the writer's soul needs to be in his work. Now, and I quote him here, as a quality of style at all events, soul is a fact in certain writers. The way they have of absorbing language, of attracting it into the peculiar spirit they are of, with a subtlety which makes the actual result seem like some inexplicable inspiration. So, here, Pater comes very close to the still prevalent idea of all art being divinely inspired. So, there was this whole belief in the Western intellectual tradition, that the classical intellectual tradition, that all art is divinely inspired, right? And here, Pater is saying exactly that every art has a soul, and that is a reflection of the writer's soul, right? And the art should reflect that it has attracted a peculiar spirit, it has a spirit of its own, right? And it needs to be inspired. By soul, the writer reaches us, somewhat capriciously perhaps, one and not another, through vagrant sympathy and a kind of immediate contact. So he says, only if there is soul in art, it can truly establish a connect with the reader. Otherwise, it is difficult to establish a connect. And then Pater goes on to give examples of texts that instill religious fervor to substantiate this divine inspiration theory. You know, that he feels that all texts are divinely inspired, or they ought to be with a soul which should seem like it is divinely inspired. And he gives the example of religious texts that can bring about that religious zeal and fervor in the reader, inspiring the reader and making the reader a believer, right? Hmm. And he says, uh, yeah, so, and then he says, this is what makes writers sometimes prophets. Such character depending on the effect not merely of their matter, but their matter as allied to in electric affinity with peculiar forms. So he says, and this is how writers become like gods, they become like prophets. Prophets is people who you invest your belief in, who you invest your faith in. So that is the power writing should wield, and that to Pater's mind is true style. Writing which will have the writer's soul in it. Hmm? And he says soul which will secure color or maybe perfume as the mind secures form. So it is the mind's responsibility to ensure that the writing has proper form, but it is the soul's responsibility to give it the proper color and the proper flavor and the proper perfume and the proper aroma, the latter being essentially finite. So this form is finite, but color and perfume and the various layers and nuances which a work of art exudes is vague or infinite. So you actually can't point a finger and say, oh, it's this, you know. But that overall thing that exudes from a work of art needs to appeal to your soul, and you, the reader, needs to be connected to the writer. And um, he compares this impact with the influence of a living person on some people, that for some people that some people can understand the truth of the world only by looking at other people's lives, because of the way principles operate through people. And it is these people who best appreciate the quality of soul in literary art, because they are looking for that infinite light in people and also in texts. They seem to know a person in a book and make way by intuition. So, characters need to be such that people are completely invested in them, they have complete belief in them, and they are like more than human, right? And that is where we can say the writer has put in his soul. And here, interestingly, Walter Pater goes on to give a lot of examples from Gustave Flaubert's idea about art. And he's quoting Flaubert over here. possessed of an absolute belief that there exists but one way of expressing one thing, one word to call it by, one adjective to qualify, one verb to animate it. He gave himself to superhuman labor for the discovery in every phrase of that word, that verb, that epithet. And that is the harmony of expression he was seeking. So he talks about Flaubert, and it's very interesting the way Flaubert pursued his uh, writing, where he would not finish or finalize a text till he had not found that one particular word which would go in that sentence, and till the time he had not his mind or his soul did not intuitively tell him that this is the right word here, he would not rest. He would not accept the text as a finished piece. And that is why he kept making drafts and redrafts till he found that one appropriate verb, that one appropriate adjective, that one appropriate phrase. And he labored. This is a lot of hard work, right? He was laboring. He would really work hard. He would be at it, but he would not accept anything less than perfect. See, so he says the one word for the one thing, the one thought, amid the multitude of words, terms that might just do. The problem of style was there. The unique word, phrase, sentence, paragraph, essay, or song, absolutely proper to the single mental presentation or vision within. So he said, I am going to struggle till I find that one word to represent that one thought, till my thought and the language I put it in is not a perfect match. I will not give up. I will not consider this work, this text complete. And he kept laboring at it. He kept working hard. So he felt that language needs to be that absolutely perfect representation of what's in my mind. Not one word here, not one word there. And therefore, this led to the idea of a natural economy of words, of some pre existent adaptation between a relative somewhere in the world of thought, its correlative somewhere in the world of language, and both alike somewhere in the mind of the artist. So these three have to come together: the thought and the world of language in the mind of the artist. They have to blend, they have to converge, right? And he was coming from a place where he said there are no beautiful thoughts without beautiful forms, and conversely. So he said, how can there be beautiful thoughts if they are not put across beautifully? If you don't have the language to put across your thoughts, no one is going to like reading it, right? So your thoughts, if they are beautiful, then the language has to be equally moving and telling, right? Right? And he, this is paradoxical. Flaubert says at one point, I shall end by not writing another line. Till the time I don't get that proper line in my head, I am not going to write another line. And he says, happy those who have no doubt of themselves. Those are happy who have no doubt about themselves, who lengthen out as the pen runs on all that flows forth from their brains. So he says, happy are those who just write non-stop, who write without giving a thought, who write because they are in that flow and they can just flow. The writing can flow just like water, or just as their thoughts are flowing from the brain. As for me, I'm not like that. I hesitate. I disappoint myself. So it's also a mental torture. It's also a mental trauma to be able to be stuck till you find that proper word, that proper phrase. And he says, I afflict my soul, I trouble my soul over some dubious word out of all proportion to the pleasure I get from a whole page of good writing. So he says, on the one hand, I have a whole page of good writing. On the other hand, I have just that one word. I am any day ready to trade that whole page for that one word. I'll keep the page aside. I'll go for that one word if that word is what I am looking for. So that word, that one perfect word will give me more pleasure than a whole page of writing can, right? And then he's quoting Flaubert, who is quoting Buffon. What Buffon said is a big blasphemy. Genius is not long continued patience. Still, there is some truth in the statement, and more than people think, especially as regards our own day. Art, art, art. Bitter, deception, phantom that glows with light only to lead one to destruction. So he says, art can only lead me to destruction because it is so torturous to constantly labor like this, to constantly keep thinking, to constantly select and wait for the right word to come. It's a lot of patience. It's like being a prisoner in your mind, right? Till you don't bring forth the text. And it's the biggest deception is dhoka, betrayal. You think that it's creative flow. It is not. It is mental block, and it is illusory. Art is like that disappearing mirage in the desert. It will show you, it will attract you, and you feel that, oh, the word is right there, and you reach over there and you feel the word has gone further, right? So it is a torment, it is a torture, and it will lead you to your gradual destruction, right? And he says, but the final outcome, if it can connect the intuitive mind of the reader to the intuitive mind of the writer, then art has achieved its purpose, right? And then he goes on to talk about inspired translation. I love this line. He says, all language involves translation from inward to outward. So the moment we translate thought and put it on paper in the form of language, it is an act of translation. It is an exercise of translation, right? And in that sense, he says, the highest as in the lowest of literature, the one indispensable beauty is, after all, truth. And here he finally talks about styles. And here he uses, very interestingly, the analogy of blood. And he looks at blood as a liquid that nourishes our body, that keeps our body healthy, internally and also externally. So if the blood circulation is proper, not only do the organs function well, even our skin looks healthier, our hair looks healthier. So there's internal and external health, right? And that is what style should be like. Style should be embedded through language in the theme of the text. At the same time, it should also be the facade or the form of the text, right? So he says, what he believed in was style, that is to say, a certain absolute and unique manner of expressing a thing in all its intensity and color. For him, the form was the work itself. And here he also compares it to music. And he says, look at music. Music is perfect because the theme and the form go completely hand in hand. And then he uses the analogy of blood. And here, see, what I was saying, that he's comparing it to music. Music and prose literature are, in one sense, the opposite terms of art. The art of literature presenting to the imagination through the intelligence a range of interests as free and various as those which music presents to it through sense. If music be the ideal of all art, whatever, precisely because in music it is impossible to distinguish the form from the substance or matter, the subject from the expression. So, music is one thing that brings form, substance, subject, expression all together. You cannot say, oh, this is the expression, this is the form, because one, the both are so interconnected and uh, intertwined, that you can't separate one from the other. And that is how ideally literature should be, he says. And so, literature, he says, presents to the imagination through intelligence what music presents through sense. So, music appeals to our senses, and in literature appeals to our intelligence. But true literature is that which will appeal to our intellect and our senses both, right? And he ends by saying that if it be devoted, so what is good art? If it be devoted further to the increase of men's happiness, to the redemption of the oppressed, so art can have a social cause. It can be dedicated to men's happiness, or it can be about social equality, social justice, or it can teach us to be more compassionate, to be more sympathetic towards each other, or it can be about revelations about truths and our relation to the world, and it can tell us how to lead nobler lives, how to strengthen ourselves, how to accomplish life's journey in a better manner. It will all this is all a precondition of good art. But if over and above these qualities, I summed up as mind and soul. So, but if over and above all these purposes, if the mind and soul comes together in art, the color and the mystic perfume, and that reasonable structure, so not just the structure, but the life force in it, the perfume, the fragrance, the color in it, it will have something of the soul of humanity. And that, in Walter Pater's eyes, is true art. Thank you so much.